Raheem, a guy that I know plenty of people that know as well. And he, to me, is one of the most interesting candidates of this cycle for certainly Washington, but really for anybody, because he has the most unique resume of anybody out there. And I don't know that I even fully understood everything that he's done. Like, I can read a resume like everybody else, but this morning, Anthony, we recorded Take Command, as we do a couple times a week, and some of that conversation you will hear at 5 o'clock today. But Logan was in Atlanta with Dan Quinn and Raheem Morris, so you'll get Logan's reflections coming up at 5 o'clock. But he talked about like how much he did, and I guess the veer that I didn't really understand in Raheem Morris's career was when he started coaching offense. And I was like, well, he went back to defense. It must have not been that good at it. But that's really not what it was. He's just a tremendous defensive coach. But he actually was really instrumental in the development of some very good football players in Atlanta. Probably chief amongst them. I mean, the best player that he coached was Julio Jones, and those were Julio's best years. So I would definitely think that the defensive perspective that Raheem was able to bring as a defensive backs guy to Atlanta under Kyle Shanahan, who he obviously knew from his time here in Washington together. It could be another member of the 2013, 2012, whatever year you want to pick, coaching staff that winds up being an NFL head coach. Of course, Ra has already been a head coach in the league, but probably got that job a little too young. Was just 33 at the time, and I don't see him as a retread because of that. And this is a guy that is, more traditionally would have paid his dues and probably got a head coaching job a couple of years ago if he didn't have that Tampa thing on his resume. Point being, what the perspective that he brought to Atlanta helped Julio have some of his best years. And then you combine that with guys like Mohamed Sanu, who was absolutely a project at wide receiver. Like, this is a former college quarterback who converted, tremendous athlete. And Raheem was there when they went to the Super Bowl. And it was a key part, passing game coordinator, in fact, if I'm remembering correctly, but certainly wide receivers coach on Kyle Shanahan's staff. Like, Kyle Shanahan doesn't trust just anyone with his offense. And Raheem Morris had that trust. And so I would certainly assume that since he left ultimately and when Dan Quinn was fired in 2020 and went and joined Sean out in Los Angeles and has done a pretty good job with that defense out there, this year had to do a lot of adjusting, and they shirted up by the end of the year to help them go on that run and ultimately, come up just short in the playoffs. Not really his unit's fault. If the offense could have scored anything in the red zone, perhaps Los Angeles advances. Instead, they kick a bunch of field goals, and Detroit wins that game by 1. But Morris would he's so plugged in, and it's something that I think is interesting when you think about head coaches. And this is something that I would, to an extent, worry about with Ben Johnson as well. Ben Johnson, Mike McDonald, these younger guys, and something that a guy like Sean and a guy like Kyle have been able to overcome. So obviously you can overcome this. It's just something that you have to have a good answer for in the interview is, like, who are your people? Who's your staff? Do you have relationships with older coaches potentially to bring in and younger coaches? Like, do you have the relationships around the league if you haven't been around a ton? And a guy like Raheem could build one of the best staffs in the league. I mean, there's a lot of irony in what I'm about to say, but like Frank Reich built what was supposed to be an all-star staff last year in Carolina. It went miserably, but that's also because despite the fact that a lot of people like Frank Reich, he didn't really bring in a cohesive staff. It's something that I think would be prevented from happening here. One, because I think the oversight of a guy like Adam Peters would be very helpful. 2, Josh Harris believes in kind of getting everybody on the same page in terms of a vision. And 3, I'd like to think Raheem Morris would be smart enough to go like, yeah, I see how Kyle did this. I see how Sean did this. It's very important that we have people that are on the same page on our defensive and offensive staffs. We're not going to make that mistake. So hopefully that would be the case. But in terms of an actual network, Raheem Morris, everybody loves that guy. You can't find someone in the NFL who doesn't like Raheem Morris. It just, I'm sure you can, but like, that guy probably sucks. Probably. Because, you're around the combine every year, you're at the Super Bowl, you're at all these NFL events, and, you just hear nothing but great things about Rod. I'm sure Andrew Siciliano, when he joins us at 4:30, will tell us the same thing. And that's exciting to me. Someone who has a vision of what an offense can look like and has been a part of it on a detailed level, and what a defense can look like, and has run some of the best ones in the league over the last 2.5 decades. Still young, has that energy. People love him. He's a dynamic personality. Like, I think Raheem Morris is going to probably get a job again, whether it's this year or next year. I think he's going to be up for it, and I think he is someone who could be a very good head coach, and I think would do a very good job here and could build a very good staff here. I also think Dan Quinn could do that as well, because many of the things I just said about Raheem Morris are also true about Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn is a guy that Logan described as a breath of fresh air when he got to Atlanta. He had been here, seen things go south with the Shanahans. He gets cut in 2016 by Jay, or 2015 by Jay. He goes to Chicago. That Chicago team was terrible and a mess. And he goes to Atlanta in 2017, and it was like a whole different job. And Quinn was responsible for creating that place that people enjoyed going to work. He's also made mistakes in how he built that, especially in the aftermath of Kyle leaving, and who they paid, how much they paid them, the roster. Like, there's some GM issues that happened at that time in Atlanta as well, where they needed Matt Ryan to play like Matt Ryan 2015 or 2016, and he never got to that level again once Kyle left for San Francisco. But they paid him so much they couldn't build out the roster. So that was part of the issue. But also, like, I think an interesting story that Logan shared with me today on the pod, I'm not betraying trust here, is that, like, after Dan Quinn got fired in Atlanta, Logan was one of the people he called and was like, hey, dude, what did I do wrong? Like, where did it go wrong? What are some things that I can improve on? And that reflective nature, I think, is encouraging. And it's why I've said, like, do I have my favorites? Yes. Is this me endorsing Raheem Morris or Dan Quinn? I mean, first of all, I would say Morris over Quinn, just to for whatever that's worth. Two, am I saying that I am endorsing either of these guys over the guys that I have been higher on all along, mainly Johnson from Detroit? No, but there's a lot of good candidates in this cycle. Like, if you're looking for a head coach right now in the league, which, by the way, a quarter of the league is. There are 8 of 32 jobs open. That is 25% of the NFL is looking for a head coach right now. You can find a good one. Someone who should be good if you surround them with the right people and you make sure that they surround themselves with the right people. So that's exciting, I think, for Washington. Ultimately, do I think that Johnson is probably the better candidate, someone who's a little more innovative, who seems to be a little bit more dynamic, who really has helped build a culture in Detroit in a way that matters and has helped them win a bunch of football games, along with Dan Campbell, obviously being the main driver there as the head coach? Yeah, absolutely. Do I wonder about who Ben Johnson knows throughout the league because he's been with Campbell for most of his career? Like, who are his relationships? Who are the people that he would bring with him? And, you know, I think Adam Peters and Ben Johnson being the top candidates would make this place very appealing to bring people with you. People are going to want to come work here, which is the first time that we've been able to say that for a long time. I'd have the same questions about Mike McDonald coming from Baltimore. He's literally only coached for the Harbaughs. John, for most of his career, starting as an intern in 2014, all the way up to what he is now as the defensive coordinator. And his one year that he wasn't with the Ravens, he was with Michigan, where he was the defensive coordinator there. So, like, pro, you've been at every level of one of the top organizations in the sport. Negative, you haven't seen how it's done elsewhere, and there's only so many people you meet when you stay in one place. So these are the kinds of questions that I wonder. These are the kinds of things that you worry about, and these are the kinds of things that, like, if you are actually Adam Peters and Bob Myers and Rick Spielman and Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales and Magic Johnson and David Blitzer, the people doing the interviews, these are the questions you're asking. I don't know the answers. And I think it's really easy for all of us in radio world and all of us in fan world to be like, that's my favorite guy. But realistically, what do we know if we don't know those answers? That's I think, what's most interesting. But with that said, you know, based off what we know, Johnson's still the guy that I probably like the most. What he does is really, really great. He's very good at it. He has a clear vision for it. But guys like Morris and Quinn, I think, are also fantastic candidates, and I'm glad that Washington is talking to them today and kind of running out all the ground balls of the top candidates around the league. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. You can give us a call, 301-230-0980. Thoughts on the head coaching search as it is ongoing, 301-230-0980. Andrew Siciliano joins us at 4:30. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. You can give us a call on the Ace Law listener line, 301-230-0980. It's 301-230-0980. Of course, we're always streaming live on YouTube as well. I see the fine board behind me. We need to update that because Anthony and I finally got ourselves lunch today. Hey! You owe me money.
I do, and I never knew what I owed.
That's probably valid.
I know I owe you 40% of whatever the total price was, though.
Yeah, that is true. So I will. It wasn't very much, but I will. Okay. I'll let you know.
Gracias.
And then hopefully none of us make mistakes and we don't have to buy ourselves a show lunch because we owe it to ourselves for being bad at the show anytime soon. But we can wipe the one that we owe ourselves off the fine board in just a moment. Right now, though, we take your calls, 301-230-0980. Let's go to Paul in D.C. to get us started. Paul, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Yeah, it's always good to talk with you because you come up with some really good, strong points, man. I like Morris, without a doubt, but also I like the Jason that's out in Detroit too, man. But Dan Quinn, man, they trying to run him out of Dallas, man. They don't even want him there. So do we want Quinn or what?
Oh man, Paul's phone's dying. Actually, I'm gonna put. Let's tell you what. I'm curious in what his Dan Quinn point is. So Anthony, double check his phone. We'll come to Scott. We'll come back to Paul in a second. Scott, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hey man, appreciate it.
You got it.
I love the OCs, but I like the DC out of Baltimore better, McDonald. Reason why is this. Got three reasons. One, he's on a winning organization that plays tough schedules year after year. They always play in the number one or the number two schedule. They got two or three playoff teams in their division, and they play outside well in the winter. And so if he brings that culture here on the defense, that defense will help keep us settled when our young quarterback is not having their best game or a stretch of two or three bad games. It'll keep us in game. So I like to see what they can do about getting him in.
Yeah, no, I like McDonald a lot. Thanks, Scott. I think McDonald's super interesting because he has used – they're very talented in Baltimore. But I think it's important to remember that good teams have talent. Like a coach succeeding with talent means he's a good coach, not the other way around. Not that just like, oh, it's the talent. Like, yeah, how many times have we seen good talent go to waste here? I would love someone who's good at identifying talent and good at using it as a head coach. That would be sick. But he does a really good job with it. And I think the schedule point's a really good one. Like every year they're going to face really tough competition. And whether he was the intern 10 years ago or now the defensive coordinator, he's been a part of that continued success. I also think like they are an offense that let Lamar cook a little bit more this year, but generally speaking has been kind of a run first. Like we need our defense to play well. They play very good complementary football. And when you're going to have a young quarterback, I don't mind that as a head coaching style. Like unless my young quarterback is like Andrew Luck, what he was coming out. And I know obviously his career wound up being super weird, but if I got Peyton Manning coming out, I got Joe Burrow coming out, like sure. We can worry a little less about complimentary football because we got one of them dudes. If we got Patrick Mahomes, we can play a little less complimentary football because I got one of them dudes, and I'm worried about making sure his dude potential goes to 1 million. But McDonald, for most quarterbacks, I think would be a great head coach in a lot of ways. The question I would always have for a defensive coach is going to be, what's your offensive identity and how do you maintain it if your offense is successful and you lose your OC? Because that's harder to replace than an offensive coordinator replacing a DC in the other direction. DCs are just easier to find than good OCs. And defenses, it's really more that defenses are easier to install than offenses. So that would be That would be thing one. And thing two, like I mentioned earlier, like what's his network like? What kind of staff is he going to hire? I don't know. That's not me saying. Whereas like Raheem Morris, it's pretty obvious he's going to hire people off of the Kyle Shanahan tree and the Sean McVay tree because those are the people that he's worked with. I don't know exactly who the OC is that comes in with Mike Macdonald. It's less obvious. He probably has an idea, which is why they're interviewing him. Let's go back to Paul. Paul, you were talking about Dan Quinn and your thoughts on him. Fire it up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for coming back to me.
Yeah.
Dan Quinn. Because I have relatives down in Texas, and they ready to give them to us. And then I heard the guy. I think it was Dan and Granny. You know what I mean?
Grant and Danny.
And they were talking to the guy that's down in Texas. And he was evaluating them. He wanted their evaluators. And he was talking the same thing, man. He said, man, they really want Dan Quinn out of there, man. So I think Dan Quinn is going to be a healthy choice for somebody. I just like the two youngins. I like Morris, even though he's been with us for a while. And I'll take the Ever Johnson. But also one of the callers just before me talking about McDonald, I like him too, man.
Yeah.
I just like the position that we're in right now.
I agree, Paul. I think thanks again for the call and for sticking with it through the phone trouble. I think Washington is such a good spot because the head coaching candidates this cycle seem to be really good. Even like the second tier candidates, your retreads, I think are good, so to speak. Like Dan Quinn, I mean, shoot, if you want to count Bill Belichick as a retread, like he's the greatest coach of all time. Do I want him here particularly? No. But like, is Atlanta smart to go after Belichick? Hell yeah. Their roster's really good. And if Belichick can take that talent and get the most out of it, like Atlanta could be really good next year if that's who they go with. Quinn goes to Seattle and inherits that secondary, like right back to where they were when he was the DC under Pete. Like that, he knows the culture there. He knows what they want to do. Like you keep Shane Waldron as the OC, like you can cook with Dan Quinn as your head coach in Seattle. The problem is going to be when Shane Waldron gets a head coaching job next year, what do you do offensively? Did Dan Quinn learn from his previous mistake, and is he grooming someone to take over a year from now, assuming that Waldron continues to grow and his stock continues to rise? Like, these are the questions that I would have, and I would hope they have good answers. But I'm also, with the callers here, like the young guys I think are super interesting. I think they're ready. In most cases to come on and do the job, and they'll have some learning to do, but you surround them with good people. And Adam Peters, by the way, is a great resource for that. He saw how Kyle, like he was there, because that's one of the things too that I think is great about Peters is he was there from day one in San Francisco. He watched how Kyle and was a part of how Kyle built the organization to be this team with a very clear, distinct identity. And not that it has to be the same identity as they have in San Francisco, although if you can do it, being a tough son-of-a-gun football team with a great offense and a great defense and great players is a pretty darn good formula. It's just hard to repeat. But he saw how it was built from an infrastructure standpoint. Like, that's really, really powerful. You need the head coach to make sure that you get it right, and Kyle was as good of a choice as you could have, even if he hasn't won a Super Bowl yet. But like you gotta have the pieces around support staff and your coaching staff, et cetera. And I think Adam Peters can help whoever it is that comes in build that same infrastructure here in Washington. All right, we'll get back to some more calls later on in the show. Next, though, we are on the phones on the guest line. Andrew Siciliano joins us from NFL Network next.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.